Welcome everybody to this monthly webinar. We have been continuing these Wednesday webinars typically on the second Wednesday of every month on bringing you interesting topics in and around supply chain operations management for the community. This week, this month, I have two very interesting people. Tom, who is an adjunct faculty at FGCU and also a founder and CEO of Epic Innovations, a supply chain architect. He has a long list of things he does. Per se, an amazing person who can make the hardest of topics very simple. I think that's a better description for Tom's skills than all things his CV says. And I also had the pleasure of talking with Justin Mills from Arthrex. He's the operations excellence manager there. Amazing clarity on what Six Sigma is, how to apply it in business sense. And so I bring you these two people who will be able to tell you what Six Sigma is, how it can be, how they applied it at Arthrex, and how can you leverage those learnings to do the same thing at your facility. Without wasting too much of time, I hand it over to Tom and Justin. All
right. Very good. Well, welcome and thanks everybody for joining in, and thank you, Piyush, for the introduction here. I'm just going to share a slide deck that Justin and I prepared to kind of guide our conversation. So let me just get that going here. Oh, Piyush, I need you to enable screen sharing, please.
It's enabled. Can you try again?
Very good. Thank you. Okay, I think everyone should be able to see it now. Okay. All right. Yeah, so what we're going to walk through over the next half hour is we're going to go through Lean Six Sigma for operational excellence. We're going to define Lean Six Sigma and give you an overview of the process, and as well as dispel some common misconceptions around Lean Six Sigma as well. We're going to step through the Lean Six Sigma process, as well as some of the key tools that are used, and some of the typical benefits that can result from implementing Lean Six Sigma. At that point, I'm going to hand it over to Justin, who's going to walk you through Arthrex's Lean Six Sigma journey and a couple of examples of the projects that they've done. And we'll end up with sharing some best practices for effective implementation of Lean Six Sigma, and then go to Q&A. So to get started, I thought it'd be important to just demystify some of the misunderstandings regarding Lean Six Sigma. So the first one is that it's sort of what I call the Mr. Miyagi phenomena, where it's kind of, Lean Six Sigma is kind of a mysterious process, very difficult to understand, very difficult to explain to others. So a lot of sort of, philosophy and related to it. And so that's sort of one. The second one is that Lean Six Sigma is very complex and complicated, difficult to implement and difficult to maintain as well. And the last one misconception is that Lean Six Sigma is kind of a magical process. So it's more the purview of operations wizards that come in and implement Lean Six Sigma by waving a magic wand, and magically things just kind of get better, right? Well, it's not that way. In fact, Lean Six Sigma really is a hybrid simply a hybrid of the Lean and Six Sigma process improvement methodologies. So just to kind of set the base with everyone, Lean is an operating philosophy of waste reduction and value enhancement. It's based on the Toyota production system, the key concepts being the focus on customer value and elimination of waste, as well as improving the flow of value end-to-end throughout the process. Six Sigma is a statistics-based process for eliminating defects. It was pioneered by Motorola, and the objective is for all processes that they have no more than 3.4 defects per million opportunities within those processes. The key concepts on Six Sigma is it is a very fact-based, data-driven process. So again, very heavy. It does use a lot of statistics, so a lot of focus on data, and it does require data validation, meaning that you need to see to verify that the results have been effectively implemented. You need to see the change in data to validate. Second concept are the outputs are determined by the inputs, sort of the garbage in, garbage out philosophy. And again, the focus on finding those few critical inputs that have a significant impact on the outputs. So again, trying to focus on what are the key levers that we need to focus on and control. And lastly, a focus on reducing overall process variation and enhancing process control. So in short, what Lean Six Sigma is it's a very structured, very practical, hands-on approach to operations improvement. And as mentioned previously, it leverages a combination of process improvement methods and tools from both Lean and Six Sigma. Some of the key concepts, first off, rule one is customer rules. And that is that we look to the customer to define what is value and what quality means to them. So it is a very customer-focused process. We look at eliminating waste and defects end-to-end throughout the process. And we focus on improving the flow of value and reduction in variation across that end-to-end process as well. We focus a lot on root cause corrective action. We try to, rather than treat the symptoms, if you will, of a process problem, we try to get down to what is the actual cause and resolve it there. So again, getting down to the root cause and making the corrective actions at that level. We do ongoing process monitoring to validate not only that the results that we were targeting have been achieved, but they are achieved over the long haul. So we can monitor that if we start to drift, we are identify it quickly and are able to correct. We do continuous improvement. So this isn't a one and done process. We're always looking for what is the next improvement. Any process can be improved over time. So we're always going in and looking for continuous improvement. And lastly, employee involvement. Lean Six Sigma is a team sport, folks. It's not just for the executives. It's not just for the management team. All employees within the company need to be part of it. And that's another key piece as well, is having everyone involved and working together to achieve the goals of and the process improvements that you need. In short, the goal of Lean Six Sigma is process improvement. So it's not, we don't just do this for the sake of doing Lean Six Sigma. We're really looking for that end goal of process improvement. So it's a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. Let's see, oops, went forward a little. Okay. As I mentioned, it's a structured process. Lean Six Sigma follows what they call the Demaio improvement cycle. And that's a 5-step process called Demaio. It's an acronym for define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. In the define section, we identify what the customer's critical requirements are to achieve customer satisfaction. In other words, what's of value to them? What does quality mean to them? And then from there, we define what areas of improvement we are going to target and what does success look like? How do we know that we're done? What level do we have to achieve? We then move into measurement, where we create a data collection plan and measurement method to measure these processes. And then we measure where we are today, the current state, and identify how large that gap is to achieve the end goal, that plan that we're looking for. From there, we go into analysis. In the analyze stage, we perform a process analysis. We identify the value stream, what are the parts of value of the process and what's waste. And we also look at the root causes of the process variation and any defects. In the improvement section, we design and implement an improvement plan to eliminate the waste and improve the flow, and also to remove the causes of the process variation and defects. And in the last phase, the control phase, this is where we monitor the process to assure that the performance levels that we were targeting are achieved and are maintained over the long haul. If we still have gaps in performance, we go right back to step one and repeat until we get the result we're looking for. So again, a very structured and repeatable process. These are some of the common tools that are used at each phase in the process. And I won't step through all of these, but these have been drawn both from both the lean concept as well as from Six Sigma. And the objective here is not, we don't use every tool every time. It depends. We pick the tools most appropriate to the situation. Again, the goal here is not to use all the tools. The goal here is to achieve the end result we want as quickly as possible. So again, we choose which ones are most appropriate to apply as part of our process. Typical benefits that you can see. First off, there's hard returns involved. These are typically measured in dollars and cents. Things like reduction in cost and growth in revenue. There's also soft returns, which can be cost avoidance, warranty costs, for example, improved productivity, getting more units out within the same amount of time without adding resources, and improved customer loyalty. By consistently meeting and exceeding the customer's expectations, that improves the loyalty of the customers. Other benefits that come, cultural change. Part of the lean philosophy does involve a change in culture within the company. And this, again, can help you drive that culture towards continuous improvement. It can also improve the rate of change within your organization. The old saying, success breeds success. As people start to see that they're starting to get traction, starting to see the improvement, typically the amount of improvement projects accelerates over time. And lastly, and as Piyush mentioned earlier, employee satisfaction and retention. By involving the employees in the process, they feel ownership for the processes. They're directly involved in setting the way that they do work. That improves the alignment of the employees, their commitment, and ultimately results in better morale and better employee retention. And with that, I'm now going to switch over to Justin. So I'll hand Justin the controls, and he's going to walk us through Arthrex's Lean Six Sigma journey, and then go through a couple of examples. So Justin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Let's see if this actually works here. And it is not. There you go. Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that, folks. So we're going to talk a little bit about those practical applications of Lean Sigma. So Tom gave a great introduction and a great overview of like, how do we actually take Lean Sigma and what is it for? And we're going to talk a little bit now about how do you actually apply it, which is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So Tom mentioned a couple of things. He mentioned that Lean really targets the elimination of waste. And depending on what camp you're in, there's between 7 and 8 different types of waste that you'll identify in just about any process. Those are transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, over-processing, overproduction. Not sure what happened there. Let me go back one slide. Not sure. Tom, are you controlling the screen as well? Thank you.
I think so. Okay.
Yeah, I think we both.
Sorry, bud. There you go. You got it.
Yeah, there you go. Overproduction and defects. And the 8th type of waste that is often identified, in some camps it's understood, is the waste of talent. So personnel's talent. The reason why we want to look at these things is because we can find them in just about every process that we have, whether it's a business process. At Arthrex, we have a shop floor, so manufacturing, and we have new product introductions. Oftentimes people associate applying these things with things on the shop floor, if you're in warehouse distribution, on the distribution floor. And those are the things that are really, really easy for us to see. What's not so obvious, though, are the business systems and new product introduction waste that happen. So this is the waste of sometimes the talent that we have within our businesses, but a lot of times it's the processes themselves. If we were talking about new product introduction, the handoff between groups, there's waste in places like that. The reason why we want to look at these things are a lot of times this is low-hanging fruit. In some cases, if you want to call it, if it's fruit at all, sometimes it's fruit on the floor. All we have to do is go out there and look to see where there's problems, or there's a problem that is inherently known by everyone. We just keep avoiding it, or we perform workarounds to get around that issue. This is more about going in and actually taking the time and figuring out what's the problem and then how do we solve it. A lot of times these things are almost free versus a process focus. So a process focus really digs into, if we were talking about machining a device, well, I want to go, how much effort is it going to take me to reduce cycle time? If a widget takes me 20 seconds to make, how can I bring it down to 10 seconds? Well, there may be a ton of engineering time in doing that. There may be a ton of resources that are needed, or you have to make a huge capital investment. When we say it's almost free, a lot of times what we won't look into is how long does it take to set up that device? And if it takes 6 hours and we can reduce that to 3 hours, that's far more effective and far easier to achieve than just the simple, or what's deemed simple, reducing the cycle time by half. So those are sort of things that we look at when we're looking at these waste eliminations. It ultimately, what it does is help us create that substantial value for our businesses, whether that's quality improvements, lead time reductions, productivity gains, capacity improvements, and associated service levels. All of those things are important to our customer, which is always our focus when we go through these processes. The customer is number one. So our shop floor formula, what we use here at Arthrex, the first thing that we do is we go to look to improve productivity. So those are the things that we can easily see. How can we better utilize our staffing? And from there, as we go through this process and we look to improve that productivity, as we make those achievements, that helps us free up capacity in our factories, whether it's cellular manufacturing, or it helps free up capacity. If we're talking about a business process, it may be a person who has to do tasks. We need to free up those times. From there, what we do is look to backfill that freed up time with outside work, because if you're in business, the name of the game is absorption. So we have to be, if we just free up the capacity and just leave it there, well, now you're essentially paying the same amount of money for, if you want to call it, less work. That's why it's important to backfill that work. So if you're outsourcing activities, or if you're needing to bring in additional resources, temporary resources to help with certain processes, you may be able to free those temporary resources up, and then bring the work in that you may be outsourcing and do it in-house, which is oftentimes a cost saving in itself. And then from there, we look to create additional value for our business. So as we do this, those saved dollars, whether it's reinvested back in the business or it helps us move on to the next thing, that is the most important part of this whole cycle. And then how it ties everything together is that, in particular for Arthrex, is for our employees. What we want to do is give them job security. Certainly everybody's always worried about, like, when they see these lean type events, well, what does that mean for my job? Well, what it actually means when we do this is I may be freeing you up for the opportunity. If you are looking to move into a management position, I can free you up to actually learn the ropes so you can become a manager. Or do you want an expanded role? So that's why it's important. And this is how the cycle perpetuates itself. We make sure that we engage more employees and they tell their friends, and more people want to be involved. And as you go through this process, ultimately you get to where, as a business, a lot of your teammates, the people who are working with you get involved, and you get that cultural change that you're looking for. So some quick shop floor examples, we'll go through them. All of our events start with the charter, but I will jump right into this one. This is an example that we use the pure math to be able to hash through this. So this is really just understanding, like, how do we look at those improvements, and then how do we quantify things? Because what's important first is that you have to be able to understand where you're starting, and then what are the general, just the general ideas behind it. So if everybody's familiar with the term takt time, it's really the pace of customer demand. And we calculate that by looking at our net operating period, and we divide that by our customer requirements over that same time. In this case, it's a 2-shift operation, and we look at things like how long are we on the clock for, and then we specifically remove breaks, lunches, cleanup times. For the folks who are in the industry, you'll realize that you don't see PF&D time in here. The reason we don't put that in there is because we expect efficiency throughout the whole process, and we bake in these like things that we have to do for machining, as far as PMs and the like, in off time. So we're not even calculating that in the time that we are working. So as we go through this process, you'll see we start with 540 minutes, we drill down to 480 minutes, and we convert that to seconds. And then we look at our customer data. So that could be sales data. In this case, we're looking at 2,000 units a day. So that means that a widget needs to drop off of this line every 28.8 seconds without fail. That's to meet our customer demand. Could we go faster? Absolutely. But going faster just creates more waste in inventory. So it's not necessarily just because you can make more isn't always the right answer. So what we did in this case, in order to go through the process, I think I'm missing a slide here. Let me go back one for you. Sorry about that. So what we did once we arrived at those takt times is really determine what our optimal staffing is. When we first started this process, like many other processes, we had one person sitting in front of each one of these machines. So we had 5 processes in this cell, and one person was sitting in front of each one, plus a couple overhead people who were watching over the process. So you can see when we actually did the time studies, did a work content analysis, what we came out with is that we only really had about 34.4 seconds of work. And when we want to determine that optimal time, we look at the time that our operators are occupied, and we divide that by the takt time. And that gives us how many people we should have in a process that's optimized. In this case, it comes out to 1.23. Obviously, you can't have about a quarter of a person, so that we really round that up to 2. We know that there's going in cases like this, we know that there's going to be some a little bit of waste baked in, but it's far better than having 5 people per shift sitting at machines. There you go. So our results, so what came out of this? So when we went through the process, we were able to make about 1,250 units over each day. After our Kaizen process, we were up to about 2,000 units. So that's a 60% improvement. Just by looking at the process and how we were actually maneuvering people through. Again, remember, we went from essentially 7 people that we had to about 2 people per shift. That brought us down to 4 total people over the 2-shift operation. So we were able to reduce staffing in this area by 43%. Productivity obviously is just a pure math calculation. So improvement of about 179%. And then our overall operator cycle time, because you have 2 people in the cell, effectively works at 17.2 seconds, which is down 50%. So the keys there is that we actually will generate real dollar savings through that labor reduction. We have future improvements that were already identified to help us increase capacity. So we know that as a business, we're going to keep growing. How do we do this? Those futures improvements may be incorporation of a secondary cell or continuing to work on it. So remember, this is a continuous improvement process. And then we looked at the standardization of the operator cycle time to help reduce the wear and tear on employees. So now you're not rushing through the process. And ultimately what that does is helps us improve quality. When you're not rushing, you make less mistakes. So that's a really, really important aspect for us, especially in the medical device space. And I know some folks on the line are also in that space. So we try to make sure that everything as a whole gets out the door with the appropriate quality that we need. So not sure what. There you go. The next example I'm going to quickly go through is a business process example. So this is our media production. So not so standard for medical device companies, but it's an actually interesting business process that takes place at Arthrex. And we kind of want to highlight some of the benefits that we got out of this. So in this case, we were mapping a business process. It's very convoluted. That's kind of what the picture at the top shows you. To put in perspective, this whole business process, as it was mapped out, was about 25 feet long in paper on a wall. What we found out of that was that our lead time was north of 130 days. There were 65 different delays, 47 decision points, and 14 different approvals. And then based on those, we had 35 different loopbacks, which is basically going back and doing the same work again, handing things off between the 11 or 12 groups that were involved 28 times. We had a turn back percentage of 610%, and the value add in the process was only 1.2%, but that's to be expected in most processes. Most processes, the value add portion is very small, less than 90%, or sorry, less than 10% in most processes. Coming through that, what we found is this idea of the hidden factory. So those 65 delays that we found were really as the result of inconsistent requirements, so not knowing what we're going to do up front. A lot of people didn't even understand the entire process, so that made it really difficult to be able to get everyone on the same page. We had manual as well as automatic handoff. So manual handoff where literally a device, or in this case, media, was handed off between groups. We had data inaccuracies. We institutionalized rework, which means we knew that it was going to occur, and we created a whole process around how to rework things, which is obviously not necessarily the best thing. And then we had multiple approval processes, and ultimately it all led to miscommunications across the board. So after a 4-day event, we were able to streamline things and simplify things much, and come up with a much cleaner process. So you can see it's not so much of a kind of a mess. There's clearly defined lanes, but the keys were that we had to put some times to those processes. We couldn't just leave everything open-ended. So we standardized the creative content build process. We started holding the requester and creative review timelines standard. We started documenting the planned revision. So if we knew that we were going to have to revise something, we knew how many times we were going to revise it before the final product was good. We had to account for the medical review and legal activities. Again, this is going to be, it's medical information. It has to be correct, but we can account for how long those timelines are. And then we had target times for posting, just to make sure that everything got out the door on time. So the final result of that is, like, with the same amount of people going from 350 assets that could be produced every year to about 1,000 assets. And there's still plans to be able to increase that further, because we still think we left a little bit on the table when it came to lead time. So after the process, we went from 137 days to 52 days. So 62% improvement. Cut down on the delays, the decision points. The approval processes was key. Getting rid of the unnecessary approvers and approvals helped move the process along. There were still 10 loopbacks that were in the process, but there's a couple of things that are in the hopper to be able to cut those down to 2 or 3. And then the handoffs, instead of 28 down to 16. The key though is that the value add percentage, even though we changed absolutely nothing about the work content, increased 175%. So that's fantastic for the folks who actually work the process to feel like they're not constantly just sitting and waiting. So we're going to talk a little bit about the best practices for these Lean Sigma implementations. And really it starts at the top. Certainly you can try a grassroots type operation to get the changes that you want, but the most successful Lean transformations really start with the leadership. Getting that good executive sponsorship in is key. And then from there, establishing cross-functional steering committees. So those steering committees, because most of our businesses don't just rely on one operation, it is key to get input from all the stakeholders. So without that, we often miss things, and that's what creates delays, friction, and overall, it could derail your entire Lean implementation. Again, when we go through these processes, you want to start internally and then we expand outward. So from a business standpoint, start with something that you can see. Don't try to solve the problems of your suppliers, but start with the things that you can control. And then once we make those incremental changes and we can gain control of those processes, standardize and improve those processes, then we begin to expand outward. And that's exactly what we've done here at Arthrex. Lean Six Sigma training. Ideally, you do it for all employees and all your partners. Sometimes that's not necessarily practical, but it's key to get as many people involved in the process as possible. And then from there, we align on our key performance indicators, rewards and incentives. And if nothing else, we have to be able to maintain that long-term commitment to change, to continuous improvement, because as Tom mentioned in the very beginning, it's Lean Sigma, it's not a project, it's a cultural change. And the companies that do that best end up being the most successful. So Tom, I'm not sure if you want to jump in with any other words.
Yeah, no, I think you've pretty well covered it. I did want to say on the KPIs and on the rewards and incentives, oftentimes implementing Lean will mean change to how you run your business, how you measure success, and how you measure success within your employees. So it is very important that you have those aligned so that it supports that cultural change. Things like productivity or capital utilization. It may be completely an antithesis to what you're trying to achieve. And the long-term journey too. One of the things too, this is a long-term journey. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not flavor of the month. It again is a commitment to the long term to making fundamental changes within your business. But so again, it's very important that people recognize that as part of implementing it. So very good. And I think with that, we go right into Q&A. So I will just open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Tom. It was a beautiful, you started from the myths, things that people misunderstand, and ended it with the best practices, and put in so many tools that we could learn from in the middle. So perfectly paced and perfect presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah, guys, questions.
Okay, so I actually have a question for you. Justin, when you go ahead and you implement these type of process reworkings such as Lean Sigma 6, and you see and you take that 25-foot sheet of paper and you take 100 processes and you thin them down to make them more efficient, and you end up, let's say, with 15, how long does that process, like what's the time frame of that process, and what's it actually take, and what's the expected of the time frame that it should take?
So Aaron, that's a great question. I mean, typically, well, it's going to be different for every business. But typically what we're looking for is when we go through our process, we put a 30-day quick hit list out there that we can make effective change within the next 30 days. The reason why is because we want, like, once we come off the event, we want to build momentum. There are some things that are going to end up on the, like, I can't do it right away, especially given this is a medical device company. There's some things that may involve FDA and the like. We know that those are longer term items, but we want to make sure that we start making meaningful change. So what I always try to tell people is that you're not necessarily looking for a grand slam. When we do these events, we set our targets extremely high. We may be looking at 80% improvement, but you know what? If in the first 30 days, if I can get 30% improvement, that's going to lead back to a lot of potential additional revenue or potential process savings for our business. I've seen projects span as long as a year, especially in the regulatory space, and I've seen things that get done in 6 months. It really just depends on how much of a go-getter the team leader, because remember, when we're doing this, we're facilitating the team, but like I will stay in constant contact with those team leaders to make sure that we are actually achieving the goals that we set out in the very beginning. So I'll follow up in 30 days just to make sure that we're tracking right. I'll follow up in 60 days and 90 days. And typically we've seen really good success. I mean, we've seen drastic changes in the 30 and 60 day windows. So I say, make sure you stay on top of it is probably the best advice I could give you.
And if I can jump in there too, that really gets back to the concept of continuous improvement, because again, it'd be nice if you hit a grand slam every time, but sometimes you need a lot of good base hits, some singles and doubles. So, you may set the goal of 80% improvement, get 30% the first round. Well, then you continue. That's part of the continuous improvement is, well, what's the next change we made? What's that followed by? So that's where continuous improvement helps you ultimately achieve the goals and to drive the best possible process that's possible.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I actually have a follow-up now. So you obviously have your team that truly does implement this. When you are looking for improvement, say the project lasts 8 months and you have reached all of your long-term goals, when you're looking for improvement, do you then, after that, look to continue to increase, looking from improvement processes from the team that has implemented this from the beginning, or do you look for something that's coming from top management or somewhere in the middle?
No, it's a little bit of everything. So the goal is to start forging those relationships with the folks who are actually working the processes, because that's where 90% of your great ideas will actually come from. Certainly, there's always going to be your business objectives. So, if you want to increase profitability, or if you're looking at COGS reduction or something along those lines, those are usually top-down objectives, and those are probably corporate objectives. But what you'll often find is that once you set these first round of improvements in place, the folks who work the process, whose lives are positively impacted by the changes, will come out the woodwork and start telling you, hey, have you looked at this process? You can certainly go and, here we actually do things called management for daily improvement, where we're constantly tracking things like scrap rates. If we see any changes or any upticks, that's where we'll dig in next. So there's a lot of different avenues to do it. You can take a data approach. You can take word of mouth. You can pull it from your KPIs, for your corporate KPIs. And any one of those could be the kind of the spark of a Kaizen.
Okay, thank you so much.
Other questions? Thanks for the question, Aaron. I had a question, since especially you guys are in medical space, with FDA regulations and all that, does it impact of how much you can improve, what changes we can do, especially with the regulations?
So Piyush, yeah, the short answer is yes. There's some places that it's extremely difficult to make the quick changes that we're talking about. One area in particular would be any type of regulatory changes. Those they take time because they certainly have to go through our quality department, regulatory, and then there's constantly changing FDA requirements. And not just FDA. We're a global company, so for all around the world, actually, there's always some conflict between each one of the countries that we currently operate in. So that makes it a little bit difficult, but you'd be surprised with the way we actually get around some of these things, especially when we start talking about new product introductions. It's so important for us to get the global perspective, and we build that into our products. So by doing that, it helps us kind of mitigate these requirements because we're taking everybody's considerations up front. So there doesn't have to be a US version of the product versus a EU version versus a MEA version versus a APAC region version. We try to standardize as much as possible and then get a lot of the regulatory space issues built into the product or the new product management process up front. So that helps us quite a bit.
Thank you. Thanks. Tom, do you want to jump into the next question, which is on the chat? Francisco Tower has this question: where do you learn LSS, Lean Six Sigma?
Okay, where do you learn it? Well, a few ways to do it. Certainly, there are Lean Six Sigma courses where we go over teaching the philosophy, some of the tools that we use. In fact, with FGCU does offer that as well. We're going to be offering it this quarter and going forward. So that's a good way to get basic, some basic training, if you will, about going a little bit more depth into the tools, how you apply them, and so forth. And from there, really, it's learned by doing, taking those tools and then applying them actually in the workplace and actually learning as you go. So it's a combination. It starts with some basic training, just to understand the process and the various tools. And from there, it's a matter of applying these items in the workplace and then building your skill based on that.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's knowing some theory and then going to the ground and using that.
Yeah. And then that's, as I said, this is a very practical process. So again, you want to definitely get to the point where you're applying them. Because you can study this stuff all day, but until you've actually, you use the tool and you see the results of it, that's really where it then brings the message home.
Hey guys, this is Jeremy Owens. I got a quick question. So once a company decides to embrace the Lean Six Sigma culture, how long before you start to see those benefits and that culture change really start to take place? Once you get through the education and kind of the onboarding of the culture or the program, how long before you really start to see the team and the company start to take that additional change? I mean, it can't. Yeah. I know that's a big process, and culture change, when you talk in most decent sized companies, is a multi-year project, right?
Yeah.
But in general, what have you guys seen in your history and your experience?
Well, I'll go first, and Justin, I'll hand it off to you. But I would say you start to see benefits right away. These projects in and of themselves, again, given that you start by defining very clearly the objectives of the process and the outcomes, you typically start to see the results instantly. As the project's complete, you see the benefit. And the more you do that and sharing that momentum, it sort of starts to build its momentum as you go. So over time, as you get more and more projects going and more success, you start to see the benefits throughout your company. But you're quite correct. The cultural change, typically we are talking, a journey of, several years actually to do it. The other piece, though, is to make sure too that you also it needs to be something that's embraced. It's not something you do as an add-on process, or it is the process. It has to be the process that you use as part of your everyday, the management, executives need to talk the talk. It needs to be part of the language, part of the way the company looks at itself and measures, part of its identity. Justin, I know Arthrex, you've been there a couple of years now, right? You've been doing this, so why don't you share your experience?
No, I mean, Tom's absolutely right. Typically, you're going to be starting small, and there will be there will be pockets of, you know, people, I would say folks throughout the organization who, if you want to call them non-believers in this process because they think it's the flavor of the month, and it is very easy to fall into the trap of it being the flavor of the month, especially if, like Tom said, if you don't have your management team, if they're not walking the walk, or talking the talk, and if they're not trying to drive the culture forward. So with Arthrex in particular, where we are in our journey is fairly young in the journey. But we started about 2 years ago, but I can tell you in the total time, this is a company of about 4,000 people. 500 people have, over 500 people now have been through different Kaizen events, and it has permeated in that short time. It has permeated just about every aspect of our business, short of like some of our outside suppliers. And the way it happened was we started small. We started with tangible results that we can see on the shop floor. And we went from like take inventory, like our lead times initially started around like 40 or 50 days. And the first round of Kaizens brought that lead time down to 18 days. And that happened within 3 to 6 months. And people saw the results. And that spurred, hey, well, let's do 2 or 3 more events, because if we can have even half of that success in other areas, it could work. And then it started catching on to our business processes. We started talking about like, well, why does it take me so long to do regulatory? Let's do a Kaizen for that. And like over in that 2 years, like I said, I think we've done in 2 years, we're on our 74th, actually, we're holding it this week, our 74th event. 500 people through the process, and significant savings, both time and effort wise, but like also real hard dollar wise.
Yeah.
And that's gotten up to our senior leadership is 100% behind doing this, because we know that we have, in order to remain competitive, that's the way we're going to be successful.
And Justin didn't mention it, but one of the examples he shared with me was that they're also applying this even into new product development too. So it's a slightly different process than the Demaio process. It's DMADV, slightly different acronym, but even applying it even to the creation of new products as well. So it's you know, applying to the processes that exist, but even looking at the future products as well. So again, I think it's a great success story, frankly.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And Justin, good work.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks.
Not just me, the whole team here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Jeremy. Other questions. So I think we are out of time. So but I'll take one quick question if anybody has it.
Justin, how do you guys translate this down to maybe your suppliers to get them on board, to have them train in this excellence so they can be more efficient for you guys in what you use?
So a lot of it is starting with just engaging them and telling them what you expect. So, you know, certainly you're going to have your quality, your typical quality, delivery, cost requirements, and safety to an extent. But like, as you start to go through this process internally, engage them. What we've found success at is, even with our new products, we are engaging those suppliers who are going to be key suppliers to these new products, and getting them involved directly in these events, and showing them exactly what we're trying to do. Now, certainly you have to sign an NDA and all those things, but the key is getting them exposed to the culture. And once they start seeing, oh, well, you know what, they're going to be demanding, you know, 99% on-time deliveries or whatever. And if that company knows that they can't meet that requirement, they surprisingly, they will ask for help. So Arthrex's approach is really, we're not just in it for us to be successful. We need our key suppliers to be successful as well. right? Because if they're not successful, then it's going to make it really difficult for us. And once they start seeing that it's not just a vendor relationship, that it's truly a partnership, that goes a long way in building that trust, and they'll come along for the ride with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. I will stop the questions here because we're out of time. Any one of you have more questions, you can post it to us at FGCU, or you can connect with Tom and Justin on LinkedIn, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer your questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I have 3 quick announcements before we end. Number one, I've posted a link for our supply chain center on LinkedIn. It's a LinkedIn page. We post announcements. We post some new developments in supply chain area. So please follow so you can keep track of all those developments. Number 2 is, as Tom mentioned, we will be offering the courses for Lean Six Sigma at FGCU in this quarter. So please stay posted for that. And if you need details, send us an email. And number 3, we are also offering the APIX or ASCM CSCP review program starting from 1st of February. That will be the last program before the 10% price hikes from APIX kick in. So if you are interested for yourself or your company to join in, please let us know and we'll be happy to help you join the course. So yeah, thank you for all that. Looking forward to see you next second Wednesday in February, where we are going to talk of transportation resilience. I think a wonderful topic in the current disruptive environment. See you there, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye now.